All right. Okay. So welcome everybody. Here we are. Celeste and I are back with number 2 in our Reactive Dog series. So for any of you who don't know us, my name, obviously Laura Hunter. This is Celeste. We are both trainers at Drop the Leash Dog Training, and we both are teaching the Walks That Work class for reactive dogs. So today we want to talk about causes of reactivity, because not always what people think. I think everybody understands what reactivity looks like. We've all seen dogs reacting on leash, at windows, in the backyard, even off leash. But I hear a lot of different interpretations as to why dogs are doing this. So, commonly I hear, well, they just don't like other dogs. They're just aggressive. They're vicious dogs. They're bad dogs. Most of the time, to be honest, this is humans interpreting dog emotions. And that is something that we just can't do, no matter how much time we've lived with dogs and worked with dogs, is we cannot get in their heads and interpret what they are feeling. And I also find that people tend to, interpret more to the negative side of things. So some of the other comments I hear are, well, those dogs just have bad manners. They really are badly trained. They really need more training, which really puts the responsibility and blame on owners for creating those reactive dogs. And sometimes it's as simple as, well, when they see other dogs, when they meet other dogs, when they see people walk by the window, when they see a dog in the backyard, that's what causes the reactivity. Well, those aren't causes, actually. Those are triggers. And there are more generalized underlying causes to reactivity. Those are just the triggers. So the underlying causes are more about, building the fire, and the triggers are about throwing the match into the fire. So we want to talk about the underlying causes today. And it's actually not that simple sometimes to understand the cause of reactivity. But for purposes of this live, what we're going to do is we're going to split it into 2 main causes. We're gonna simplify that a little bit. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about fear-based causes and frustration-based reactivity. Sorry guys, too early in the morning. So we're going to start with fear, because fear is a big one, and fear in dogs is very misunderstood. So when people see dogs lunging out on the street and barking ferociously, or trying to get through the fence in the backyard, looking like they want to just go and rip the other dog to shreds, the last thing they think about is whether that dog is actually fearful. And in a lot of cases, they really are fearful. People have a hard time thinking about dogs as fearful at all, because after all, they're predators and they have big teeth. They can do a lot of damage to other dogs. They can do a lot of damage to us. So how could they possibly be fearful? Fear is actually more normal and more common than people believe. When our dogs were wild animals, when they were predators that lived out in the wild for thousands of years before we domesticated them, fear was actually a survival tool for dogs. For any animal. So if you're a wild animal and you are brave enough to approach something unfamiliar, for all you know, that something might actually kill you or eat you. So fear of the unknown was actually a survival response. And because fear of animals who were cautious, who were fearful, who didn't approach those potential dangers, actually survive to pass on that genetic material to their offspring. So fear of the unknown was a survival technique, and animals who were afraid did survive. And our dogs still carry a lot of that genetic encoding. I think there was a recent research paper. I think I actually posted on our Facebook page, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but researchers have found that 60 to 70% of all dogs in our life right now will have some sort of fear response to something throughout their life. So it's a pretty high number of dogs exhibiting fear. But as I said, it's normal and it's a survival technique. So one of the questions is, that people have is, why does fear trigger such an aggressive looking response? Well, if you're afraid of something and you encounter something you're afraid of, you have three choices of action. You can fight, you can freeze, or you can flee. And most of the time, I would think that our dogs would choose flight if possible. But in our society, flight isn't always possible, especially if you are out on a leash. Flight is not possible. So if you can't increase distance from the scary object, from the scary trigger, by getting away yourself, then your only choice is to go on the what's the word I'm looking for?
Defensive.
Sorry?
On the defensive.
No, on the offensive, actually.
Offensive, that's right.
If you go on the offensive, you can hopefully chase that scary dog to a distance at which you can deal with. So I guess the best defense is a good offense in that case. So if they can't flee because they're on leash, the only choice is to push the scary thing further away, to chase it further away. So let's look at some of those underlying causes of fear. And one of the big ones is genetics. Puppies can actually be born fearful. And the mother plays a big role, obviously, in that, in a couple of different ways. So if the mother is a fearful dog herself, she can pass that fear on to offspring. If the mother happens to be exposed to something that stresses her in the later part of her pregnancy, she can also produce fearful puppies who are kind of puppies who are born ready to hit the ground running. I'm not a scientist. Celeste is not a scientist, so I can't explain the complete genetic mechanism there, but I don't think they are saying that there is a specific fearful gene in any of our dogs. What happens genetically is that there's more of a predisposition to fear that gets passed on, as well as a lack of resiliency. So I know, because Celeste and I both have fearful dogs, I know when I met my dog, my reactive dog, Maddie, she was just barely 3 weeks old. And I immediately knew there was something different about her. I didn't know then what I know now. I didn't have as much education about fear, but I definitely saw a dog who was not as interactive with other puppies in the litters. There were 2 litters, actually, was not interactive with those dogs, and was not terribly excited about interacting with humans either. So there was definitely something there. Now, she was 3 weeks old. Something could possibly have happened in the first 3 weeks, because we're going to talk about learning in a minute. But I actually had a conversation with a vet behaviorist about this, and he felt also that it was a very good possibility that that was a genetic occurrence. And I can't tell you if there were other dogs in the litter that were fearful as well, but when you have litters of puppies, you get all different, all the type sizes and outlooks. So so definitely, I think Maddie's fear was genetic. What about Penny, Celeste?
I don't think so. I met both her parents and her litter mates, and I know one of her litter mates still who is not at all fearful. So for her, I think it's another thing that we'll come to later. So I don't want to jump ahead, but I think her it's more of a breed thing.
Yeah. So I feel the same about Maddie's litter mates. I am not sure. certainly Rosie was not her litter mate, but they were born pretty much. They grew up together, but different mother. I didn't see a lot of fear. And, you know, as Dr. Piquel said to me, something as simple when you're a puppy as getting maybe a toenail caught, you know, in a crack, and that we know how painful that is for dogs. Something as simple as that could cause fear in the early weeks as well. So it's at the best, it's a good guess. Definitely genetics, but learning is also, actually, no, instead of going to learning, I'm going to skip to, I'm going to talk about socialization next, because definitely everybody knows something about socialization. I think sometimes there's a misinterpretation of socialization, or a simplification, in that your puppy just needs to play with other dogs, and if they can play really well with other dogs, that is wonderful socialization. But we think of socialization not just about playing with other puppies. To me, socialization is a vaccination against fear in your dog. So there is that magical period. Nobody's quite sure whether it's 12 weeks, whether it's 14 weeks when it ends. But in that first magical 3 months or so, your dog's brain is actually incredibly flexible. And I actually heard the other day, I actually read something about the fact that your dog's brain actually looks differently when they're puppies. They can actually do MRIs and see the difference in the dog's brain. But that is the period when it is much easier to work with any fears that your dog has. So much easier to change the emotional response in puppies than it is in older dogs. Once that period is over, if your dog has any fearful tendencies, it's much more difficult to overcome those. I know people call me all the time with older dogs, and they say, well, the dog needs to come and work on their socialization skills. But really, after that socialization period, that ship sailed. There isn't a lot you can do. It is very, very hard to reduce or eradicate fear after that point. I did socialize the daylights out of Maddie because I knew there were issues, and we worked very hard at conditioning her to like all experiences, all people. She does like people, everything. And her trigger is, of course, other dogs. And so we worked very hard at other dogs. She went to puppy classes. We did counter conditioning. We did make progress during that socialization period. Which brings me to our next cause, which is learning. It is totally simple for your dogs to acquire fear throughout their lives through learning fear through bad experiences. So if a dog is hurt by a human, if a human hurts a dog, the dog can develop a negative emotional response to people. If a large man decided to yell at your puppy, your dog could develop a negative emotional response to that, and from then on think that all large men were scary, scary things. In Maddie's case, I was actually there at her moment. And she was a bit older. We were just coming out of that socialization period. And in terms of her response to other dogs, we were kind of still sitting on the fence. And she was pretty good. She was able to be in class with other dogs. At that point, other than the other two that she lives with, I wasn't asking her to play with other dogs. I was just asking her to be emotionally okay around them. And we were waiting for a class to start one night, and there were two older dogs waiting for another class, and the owners took them off leash to let them play. And they both just rolled right over her like a steamroller. And that was the defining, I think for Maddie, that was the defining moment in her life about how she should regard other dogs, because she came up barking hysterically for her life, and I just got her out of there. And that I think that was the tipping point for her. So, it's, even though you socialize and socialize, because I know a lot of owners of reactive dogs are often saying to me, did I do something wrong during socialization? Did I not do enough during socialization? And people beat themselves up about that, and they shouldn't, because I did everything, and that one moment just tipped us over to the wrong side of the fence. As I said earlier, people don't always have the right concept about socialization. It's not anybody's fault. That's the role of our dog trainers, to explain that process to people and help them understand how important it is to make sure your dog has a good, positive emotional response to everything in life. But there's a lot of misinformation out there about socialization. So, for anybody with puppies, I highly encourage them to go to a good dog training class instead of trying to socialize your dog based on YouTube videos, because there is a lot of misinformation out there. And, if your puppy has any fear issues in that period, there is a process. It's called counter conditioning, and it does work, especially in the puppy period, but you have to know how to do it. It's simple, but there is an order of events. There is a process to it. So again, you need to talk to a good dog trainer about that, and then sometimes, for various reasons, puppies just can't get out there to socialize. And we are sitting right now in COVID times, post-lockdown. And that's been tough for anybody with puppies, because a lot of people were just afraid, and rightly so, to leave their homes. So I know that we are running puppy play groups in our Good Pup program, and we have a lot of puppies coming in who've never been exposed to other dogs their age, and are some are fearful, some are getting over it. Hopefully we've caught it young enough. But owners are just are saying to me, this is the first time my puppy's ever been in a location with another puppy. It's the first time they've ever been exposed to another puppy. We're so happy that we're getting this opportunity. So if you have what I guess they're calling them COVID puppies now. If you have a COVID puppy, it sounds awful. Definitely trying and get them out there and get them socialized. Even if they are just over the socialization period, it is still not a time to give up. I would definitely find a play group or a puppy class or a program and try and get them in as soon as possible, because it isn't the end of it at this point. So there is hope that your puppy can be social, but definitely I think everybody needs help for that, for sure. Okay. Anything you want to add at this point, Celeste, or do I just keep on blurbing away?
No, I think that your point about there being so much misinformation about socializing is an important one, because you'll have people who say there have to be a certain amount of people that you meet in a certain amount of time, or
yes,
like it's almost like people don't realize that the quality of the experiences is almost more important than the quantity of them.
Yes, that is a wonderful point, because how many times have we seen stuff posted that, and there is stuff on YouTube that and people used to believe this all the time, that your puppy needs to meet 100 people in the first, 6 weeks of its life, or 8 weeks of its life, or whatever, 12 weeks of its life. And I know if I had to meet 100 people in that time period, I would never want to meet people again. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And quality for sure, even, we're social distancing. Even though we're social distancing, it is still totally doable to socialize your dogs to all those experiences out in the world. And in fact, it is almost, in some cases, I'm almost happier that there's a bit of social distancing, because I've had so many people just come up and plop a puppy in my arms and say, here, my puppy needs to meet you.
Yeah.
But that might be overwhelming for a lot of puppies, just
Yeah.
to, have no control, be plopped into a stranger's arms, and or we'll talk about puppies meeting puppies
I was
a
going to
little
say
bit further down the road.
Yeah.
But definitely the quality of socialization is more important than quantity, and it's totally doable.
And so also the thing we hear a lot for puppy socialization meetups and groups is, but my dog's not fully vaccinated yet.
Exactly. Yes, and I know that there are different opinions out there amongst vets, and I am not a vet, but I know that the American Veterinary Society has put out a position paper to say that there are more dogs at risk of being surrendered to shelters for lack of social skills than there are dogs at risk of picking up health issues if they go to a well-run puppy class or a well-run puppy group.
Mhm.
So like I've had a lot of people want to sign up for puppy class and their puppies are already 13 weeks old. Your puppies don't have to wait that long. And, I should actually, I'm going to post it on I'll post it on the Drop the Leash Facebook page. I'll post that position paper from the American Vet Society. But certainly puppies can go to class a lot sooner than people think. And I'm not plugging our online program, but one of the reasons that I am staying with the online puppy program is because even when the puppies don't have their second set of shots, we can already start giving people activities and ideas about how to socialize your dog, even though they haven't had their second set of shots. You can totally safely socialize your puppy out there in the world. You just have to follow certain protocols. So super important. But again, as I said, I socialized the daylights out of mine, and we did not make the success I was hoping to and I think largely because of that learning experience. So, learning, making sure that your puppy does not learn through those bad experiences out in the world is super important. And again, find a good puppy program that can teach you how to do that. All right. Sometimes health issues can cause reactivity in dogs. So if we hear of a dog who has become suddenly reactive, the first thing we always suggest is go to your vet and get a complete examination because, even with humans, we know that if you are in chronic pain, you do tend to be cranky and emotional with other people, so they're no different than us. Pain does cause those type of responses emotionally. So definitely you want to get your dog checked out. An interesting thing that I learned the other day that I had no idea about is that they've now done research that's proven that dogs can have sensory processing disorders. I found that really fascinating because for 30 years I worked with kids with sensory processing disorders. So there is a gene actually that and dogs can carry this gene that causes oversensitivity to smells and sounds and tactile, any sensory sort of stimuli out in the world, that they can overreact to that. So if you've got a dog who's sensitive to the environment, and we'll also talk about that in a minute because Celeste and I have dogs who are overly sensitive to the environment, but I don't think it's a sensory processing disorder, but we know how if they are sensitive to the environment, how easy it is to go into that reactive mode really quickly, more so than some other dogs. So that's just one other thought about that. I don't think it's sensory processing disorder is huge, but it is evidently there and it exists. And the other thing, while we're sort of working along mental and physical and psychological health, is that fearful dogs can also be anxious dogs. And anxiety is different than fear, in that fear is a response to a specific stimulus or trigger, whereas anxiety is anticipation of something happening. So, your dog can go out on a walk and see another dog and react to that. But if you have an anxious dog, they might be thinking, and that dog might be okay until they react to the other dog. They might be fine on the walk up to that point. But an anxious dog is probably thinking as they go through the door to the outside, oh my God, am I going to run into, another dog? Could this happen? So anxious dogs are dogs that I think, from my own personal experience, again, I'm not a vet, I'm not a scientist, but from my own personal experience, I have a dog, again, my fearful dog, Maddie, who seems to live in a constant state of anxiety. And we are always trying to reduce that anxiety level. So I know with Maddie, her reactivity goes from 0 to 100 in the snap of a finger. And I do think that it is because the underlying anxiety is just pushing up the intensity of her response. And it's not that I just think that. I've been told that by a vet behaviorist as well. So anxiety, if you have anxiety, if your dog has anxiety, I should say, that also is not a cause of reactivity, but it certainly is a huge influence on the level, I think, of reactivity. You find Penny has anxiety too, right, Celeste?
Yeah, Penny is an anxious dog.
Yeah. So there's so many things that go together into that whole reactive response in fearful dogs, and sometimes it's complicated. Celeste and I have talked about this because we both have very different dogs. Maddie always has that that fear reactive response to other dogs, always. Penny's much different.
Yeah, it's not predictable.
No. So, and we don't have answers to these questions, to be honest, because we've talked a lot about Penny, and so she is fearful. We feel it's fear reactivity in Penny. Do you? Yes.
Yeah.
Right. But if it's fear-based reactivity, why is it with some dogs and why isn't it happen with other dogs? Other than the other day, we were actually talking about the fact that in her agility class here, you can expose her to other dogs on a more gradual basis.
Yes.
And let her take her time, whereas out on the street, sometimes those dogs pop up in her face, and sometimes novelty is hugely impactful with dogs. So something unfamiliar pops up unexpectedly, I really do think you're going to get that reactive response.
Yeah.
And the other thing that does impact reactivity, not necessarily fear-based reactivity, but reactivity in general, is that certain dogs breeding, the way humans breed dogs, and the way in which we've bred dogs for certain jobs, is actually also encourages some breeds to be super responsive. So Celeste and I, between us, have 1, 2, 5 herding dogs, and we there's an excellent podcast out there by a woman named Kim Brophy, who uses herding dogs as an example of people should really know their breed before they buy them. But she talks a lot about herding dogs in that podcast, and I can actually put it in the comment section under this live when we're finished. And so herding dogs who are bred specifically to micromanage vast numbers of sheep, while also looking out for predators showing up to steal the sheep, happen. Like they're super hyper vigilant dogs because they need to be to do their job. And a lot of herding dogs are prone to something called sudden environmental change, which means if anything pops up unexpectedly in the environment, they are going to respond immediately, because that could be the predator coming to steal the sheep, or it could be a sheep sneaking off and, to disappear forever. So it definitely helps me understand when my dogs go off on everything they see in the environment. And ironically enough, I call Maddie my reactive dog, but the other two are just as reactive. They're just not reactive to, they're just not as reactive socially as Maddie is. But, a knock on the door, a leaf falling in the driveway, my husband walking into the room, they can all just go crazy in the blink of an eye. So, if you have a herding dog, they are going to be prone to those reactive responses. They're bred to give you those super quick reactive responses. And sometimes, people think it's fear, but sometimes it's just being a herding dog. We have 2 fearful herding dogs, so is that affecting them as well? That breeding, is that an underlying cause of their reactivity? We don't know. Just throwing out these questions.
So do you think, knowing that Penny is an anxious dog, mixing the anxiety with her being a herding dog and having that that sudden change of environment, do you think that is one of the things that aggravates this whole situation with her?
I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I wonder about my dog. I wonder about Maddie too, and I wonder about as I said, all of my dogs react to a lot of things out in the world, and most of us, and so do Penny and Gimli. The only thing I wonder is if it makes some herding, because I know herding dogs are often described as being spooky. So do some people, is it possible to mistake fear for herding dog reactivity, or vice versa? I don't know, but someday I'm going to track down Kim Brophy and ask her about all of this. So it's really hard to know. That I don't know. I know that we deal with it in somewhat the same way, in which we have to catch the response early and shut it down. But, Michael, I watched a video in my course with Michael Shikashio. It was a great video. And it was a woman with a young German Shepherd. And Michael went over to their house for the assessment. And of course, the German Shepherd is lunging and barking on leash, and just looks totally crazy. And Michael, he said to everybody, does this dog look frightened? And no, not necessarily. So when he was doing the assessment with the lady, when you do assessments for dogs that show reactivity or aggression, you always look, you look quite intensely into the dog's background and breeding. Well, the dog had come from Europe, and both parents were the result of dogs that have been bred for generations to be protection dogs. So as Michael said, there wasn't an ounce of fear in that dog. And what did he say? He said, it's just the dog is now, getting older, approaching, maturity. And the dog is just saying, oh, look, I'm just doing what my mommy and daddy were taught to do. And now look at me, I can do it really well too. So, sometimes it's really hard to tell if we don't have that level of expertise, whether our dog is fearful or whether there's something else in play. And I know sometimes Maddie's in the backyard and she barks at the dogs in the agility field. We see her at the fence, and then Brett calls her and she just scampers back so happily for that piece of food. So I look at that and I go, I'm not sure either. So, you know, it's not clear cut for any of us. As I said, someday I'm going to find somebody who can answer all these questions for me. But we just work with the emotional response in front of us. It doesn't, for us, we've come up with a system where we are specifically just trying to reduce the emotional response. And so whether it's reactivity, whether it's, you know, not fear, whether it's fear, whether it's frustration, I think that it is possible to just work on that specific emotional response in a way that you can just, take down the emotional response, no matter whether it's fear, frustration, or something else.
We're lucky that that training works for all of those situations.
Yes, and I have to say that in my, not, you know, I haven't been training dogs for 40 years or anything, but we have a lot of reactive dogs here. I have yet to meet one who's just aggressive for the sake of being aggressive. You know, it either seems to be fear or frustration here, you know, and that's been my experience. Again, you know, other people with more experience may have different, you know, opinions on that. So, so that leads us to the other side of the coin, which is frustration. And this one is even a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around, the fact that your dog can look so unbelievably mean and aggressive and vicious and bad out there, lunging, barking. Oh my gosh, you know, is he going to bite somebody? And they're simply frustrated. But well, I'll run an analogy by everybody in a minute. But I think there are a lot of dogs out there. Actually, we know this, don't we, Celeste? Is there are a lot of dogs out there who are simply what we call leash frustrated. Your entire agility classes got leash frustration. We know that. And to me, that cause of leash frustration has a lot to do with dogs' current lifestyles. So this is not the same lifestyle that they had when I was a kid. I'm really dating myself here, where when I was a kid, everybody just let their dogs out the door and they roamed the neighborhood, and then they came home at night and they were perfectly happy. And they were out there doing what dogs do, which is roaming around in the environment, getting lots of mental stimulation and enrichment, which was satisfying for them. And nobody can do that anymore unless you're like me and you live on a farm. And even then, we don't let our dogs out to roam without us all day anyway. But our dogs now spend a lot of their time in the house. You know, people are working, and you know, some dogs are spending all day in the house waiting for their owners to come back from work. And again, I'm not being critical of anybody. It's just the lifestyle at this point. And some dogs are perfectly fine with that. There are dogs that can cope with that. I don't have them. Mine couldn't. Mine were in the house yesterday because of the heat, and it wasn't a pleasant evening in my house. But, you know, we leave them in the house, and for the most part, if they're in the house on their own, they're not getting that enrichment, that mental enrichment they need. And then we take them out for short walks on 6-foot leashes. And you've got a dog that is dying to get out there in the world, because that's really where they've evolved to be. And they want to get out there. They want to explore. They want to smell. Oh my God, they want to smell, because that's like the greatest thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it's really tough to do that on a 6-foot leash. So, you know, they pull to smell or to, you know, go explore something. And then immediately there's tension, or there's a tug of war between the owner and the dog on the 6-foot leash. And the dogs get frustrated. And I think it's hard for people to but it's hard for people to have empathy for what's going on in the dog. And sometimes people don't even think about the walk being for the dog. I get a lot of requests from people, can you teach my dog to heel beside me for the entire walk on a loose leash, because I just need to get some exercise. I want my dog right beside me. And certainly, you know, if you want to take your dog out and go jogging or biking with your dog, that's great. But really, dogs need to get out there and they need to smell, because smelling stuff out in the world is how they interact with the world. It's email, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's all that for them, and it's incredibly satisfying and mentally enriching. I know you spend a ton of time out there with your dogs letting them sniff.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I'm gonna say like half our walk is letting them sniff in the morning anyway.
Yeah, and you know, you're not in an area where you can let your dogs off to run. You're in Cornell, it's very busy, but your dogs come back from walks pretty satisfied, do they not?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because this morning the University of Guelph put out an article on their website saying that dog bites are more likely in cities than in rural areas. Yeah. And to me, I mean, their article was kind of, their study that they did was to encourage rabies vaccinations, but I'm seeing it as, you know, you have these dogs that are in small areas and are leashed, so there are always some restrictions, and so they're more likely to become reactive and bitey than a dog who has room to roam and sniff and relax. And
well, that's good to know. Maybe if you, what we'll do is we'll post that link, because it'd be good for people to see. Yeah. And also, we did a Walks at Work series. It was just a 4-part video series on what a walk should be for your dog. I think what I'll do is I'm going to post the first video up on the Drop the Leash page for people to watch, because that's the one about walking with your Aunt Alice. And I think that got a lot of response because it helped people understand how frustrating walks can be for dogs. And so, you know, a general walk is frustrating for a dog. But if you have a social dog who wants to meet and interact and play with other dogs, the frustration level rises dramatically. Yeah. Because your dog wants to go meet that other dog. And we have reasons, which we can't get into in this live, hopefully in the next one, as to why we discourage on-leash greetings totally. But what's happening, and some of this stems from puppyhood. So we're going to give you guys a really good tip for what to do with your puppy when they're you know, in those first few months. And so what happens is when people we see it when people bring puppies to class, and again, not being critical, we try, because when you have a puppy, you never think of reactivity. You never think that anything is going to happen to cause your dog to lunge and bark on the leash at other dogs. It just never enters your mind. So people come to class and the puppies are so excited to see each other, and the puppies drag their owners into the center of the room or the field to meet all the other puppies. And it's great that they want to meet other puppies. I always say it's great that they want to meet other puppies, but you don't want to set that precedent that every time a puppy sees another puppy, whether it's in a training class or out in the neighborhood, that every single time they get to drag you to meet that other puppy, because dogs get bigger and they get stronger. And eventually at some point owners say, oh my God, you can't do this anymore. You can't drag me on my face to another dog. And so the dog who's been able to meet every other dog in life looks at you and goes, are you kidding? I don't think so. So we always give the human analogy that it's a little bit like taking your child past a candy store or a toy store, and they want to go in, but you got a death grip on their arm and you go, no, you can't go in. And of course they're a child and they don't really understand anything but what they want and actually what they feel they need. And so they get frustrated and they get upset and they throw a temper tantrum, which is what, you know, frustrated dogs really do, because they're just upset. And so, you know, if you're taking your child for a walk and at every corner there's another toy store, another candy store, and you're still saying, I'm sorry, you can't have that, you can't have that, you can't have that, like, how frustrated are they going to be? They're going to go right over the top and bite you or kick you in the shins, which your dog can do too, basically. You know, so people wonder why sometimes, you know, their dogs get so frustrated, people end up with redirected bites to the leash or to their arms. The dogs are just totally overwhelmed with frustration. Did you want to add something? Sorry, Celeste.
Well, no, I'm just thinking also, like, people who let their dogs meet every dog, it's very unfair for the owners with dogs who don't want to meet every dog.
Yeah, those of us with reactive dogs are really
Yeah. So I mean, then you have a frustrated dog that wants to meet a dog and then is barking, and then you have that fearful dog who is barking back because they're afraid of this reactive dog barking at them. And then the parents or the owners, whatever, get very frustrated as well, and it's not a good scene.
It's just a big, massive frustration.
It's terrible.
I know. And if it keeps going over and over and over again, so again, to go back to your child, you know, by the time you drag them past 5 candy stores and they see the 6th one, they don't even ask to go in. They just look at the candy store and it just elicits that automatic response of frustration. So, you know, if your dog gets to that level, what's going to happen is that if they're frustrated over and over and over again, it's going to start to build a negative emotional response to seeing other dogs, you know. So, and again, this is my opinion, but I've seen so many, is that the whole situation just becomes a negative situation for your dog. Oh God, there's another dog. I'm not going to meet it. I'm like, God, here we go again, you know? So other dogs start to be predictors of feeling bad, you know? Yeah.
It becomes a negative experience for the handler too. And then people start to not want to walk their dogs anymore and have that, you know, that's when the feelings of I did something wrong, I'm a bad owner, come up.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, you're always more empathetic to the owners. I'm totally dogs. But that's okay. We work well together. So like our tip for all the puppy owners out there are, yes, you can absolutely let your puppies meet other dogs in more acceptable ways. So if you can, you know, teach them that they might not get to meet every puppy, call them back, you know, try and get their focus and attention, heavily reinforce that, play a game, throw some food, and then maybe you move on and you don't meet the puppy, or maybe you say, okay, we can go meet the puppy now because, you know, you came back, you gave me some focus, attention, some impulse control. So it's never too early to start teaching that to puppies, you know. And if you've got those social dogs and they really need to meet, and, you know, lots of dogs are social, and they do need to play with other dogs, and it's incredibly enriching. Even if they don't play with other dogs, I know there's dogs that go to the dog park and just hang out. Take them to a daycare, take them to a dog park. You know, arrange if you got puppies, try and arrange a play group with or a play session with another puppy. You know, there's lots of trainers now, including us, who are doing puppy play groups for all those puppies who haven't had a chance. So there are other ways that you can expose your dog to other dogs in an acceptable manner. The only thing that we ask is that just try not to let your puppy decide to drag you to every other dog. And, you know, otherwise we'll see you in 6 months in the reactive dog program. You know, that's because we see the other end of it. So we're more sensitive to it than most people with puppies at this point. So I'm just sorry, I'm watching the time here because I know we only have about 10 or 12 minutes left. Is there anything you want to talk about, Celeste? I think before you said something about, so like I talked about how Maddie, where I feel her reactivity developed. What about Penny? I don't think it's straightforward.
Well, I don't know exactly. I can think of situations that didn't help. When she was a puppy, I was really unfamiliar with this whole idea of reactivity, and even like really training to the extent that I do now. It was new to me. But when I took her to puppy classes, she was already kind of a shy dog. Like, she's fine off leash. She's fine to watch other dogs, but she doesn't want to interact. So she was put in a puppy group where at the beginning of the class, they would have like 10 minutes of free reign playtime. And she was often chased by the other puppies and would try to hide behind me. And I was told to just back off and let her figure it out. And I think that for her, being an anxious dog was probably not the right approach. But again, I didn't really know anything at the time. But I find anytime she sees dogs running towards her in any way, it's an automatic response now, of teeth showing, and then she tries to hide. And if they don't, she just barks and lunges. I mean, I don't know if that was like any kind of life scarring event or if it was just kind of like an indicator, but there was no consent.
No.
When she was a puppy, there's no looking at her and reading her body signals and saying, you know what, she's not okay in this situation. We need to stop it.
Yeah. And to me, that's a learned fear response.
Yeah.
You know, absolutely. I think.
And it happened more than once. Every time we went to this class for like the 6 or 8 week class session it was, I can't remember, this would happen every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another thing that puppy owners should be aware of. Although I know I said that puppies shouldn't have the choice to drag you to every other puppy, which is a different situation. But if puppies want to interact or not, it is always their choice. They always have to feel safe and they have to feel good about it, because the biggest issue in dogs with fear is they don't feel safe. We do. So, you know, if you're going to go to a puppy class, you really want to be in a puppy class where they teach you about consent tests with dogs, with other puppies, where they match the puppies. So one puppy isn't totally overwhelmed. And so, you know, you really have to, if you're running a puppy group, you really have to think about who's in that puppy group and how well they match, because you don't want what happened to Penny, which was she was just totally overwhelmed. And consent tests are really important. If your puppy isn't having a good time, you totally step in and take the other puppy away, and it's your puppy's choice to want to go and interact or say, that was enough for me, thank you, I'm walking away. So consent tests are crucial for puppies in play groups. Yeah. So and puppies, you know, if puppies need to hide, they should totally be able to go and hide. You can't force fear. You can't force social interaction when a dog is afraid. It's just not going to go anywhere, but downhill. So people, you know, if there are people out there listening to this with puppies, make sure if you put your puppy in a play group or a class that they do just consent tests, and they are big on making the puppies feel safe and secure for sure, you know. And, you know, one of the questions that we get in, you know, for, you know, people who want to come to walks at work is, can you fix my dog? Can you get rid of this fear? Can you eliminate this behavior in my dog? There are no guarantees. You and I both have fearful dogs, and they're always going to be fearful dogs, but that's who they are, and we don't feel that they need to be fixed. Other than our goal is to reduce that behavior, not strictly because it's not a socially acceptable behavior out in the world, but because it's an emotional response on the dog's part. And it's not a pleasant emotional response for our
No.
dogs to go through. Nobody wants to be reactive like that. And so we want to reduce that for the dog's sake and for the owner's sake, as you said. And we do reduce it, and we rely heavily on management, and we do training as well. Not training, but we teach our dogs to make choices that work for them in those situations. I hate to say training because it just sounds like it's the responsibility of the dog. It isn't. So we both know that we can reduce it, we can manage it, we can make life better for both the dog and the owner, because we've done it for our own dogs. But neither of our dogs are ever going to be in a play group, you know, and we're not going to ask them to interact with other dogs, but you can't fix it because your dog really isn't broken. You just have a social issue. And, you know, we haven't talked about, you know, for us, reactivity is not just on leash. It's the window barking, it's the door dashing, it's the fence barking in the backyard. And some of that is a little bit different for the dogs in that it's actually quite reinforcing. And we talked about this in our program, is that if you go to the door and bark at the mailman every day, the mailman goes away. Wow, that really worked. If you bark out the window at people and, you know, they keep on walking by, well, that was really great too. Same with the backyard. So that is a different case scenario. That's not fear-based, and it's sometimes it's frustration-based, I think. It could be fear-based as well, but it's a little bit easier to reduce those behaviors. Leash reactivity, I think, is a little bit more difficult because we can't control everybody else in the world as well.
Yeah, you can't control the environment.
Yeah, but we can reduce it, and we can, the best thing, you know, the best solution always is to be proactive. So, you know, if people can work on a lot of these issues in puppyhood, you might, again, have a dog who's fearful, like Maddie, from birth, and things happen, and, you know, life gets in your way. But I also think that I have substantially reduced her ability, you know, or her desire to display those behaviors out in public, and we can go places. You know, we can get to the vet, we can get where we need to go. So it is possible. You know, as I said, we're not going to change your dog, but we can reduce it, and we can teach the people how to do that so that they can have a better life together with their dogs. And
yeah, less stress.
That's everybody's goal, just to have a better life together, you know. So I think we're out of time here. Is there anything you want to add to any of that, Celeste?
No, I think that was good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll let everybody go. We are planning another one, maybe next week. I have some ideas. Celeste and I have talked about a few ideas, so we'll let everybody know, and hopefully we'll see everybody next week for the next Walks at Work live video. So
yeah, and in the meantime, if you have questions,
oh yes,
post them in the comments on the page, and we'll try to get to everybody.
Yes, and we are hoping to start another Walks at Work class. We're able to, actually, we can get it up and running as soon as people want us to. So if you are interested, I think Scott has posted the link to the sign-up page on Thinkific, so you can check us out there. And if you have any questions, as Celeste said, just leave them and we'll be happy to answer them. So thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Take care.